Hello and welcome to another episode of the Maverick Mystic Arts Podcast. We'll be continuing our exploration today of step 1 of this book here, Franz Bardon's Initiation into Hermetics. Now, one very cool thing that he does is within each step, he looks at the mental, astral, and physical components of development. So the first portion of each step is devoted to the mental. And in step 1, we look at 3 different mechanisms of essentially meditation or mental training. Okay, now the mental training over time can bring us into a state of meditation, just as the astral training over time can bring us into a state of meditation, and many of the physical elements as well from the physical training can bring us into a state of meditation as we progress with them. So in step 1, we have the mental training. Now, this is broken up into 3 categories. The first is essentially observation of the thoughts. The second is stillness, or essentially a concentration, absolute choice, and unwavering single-pointed focus, more or less taking us into a samadhi type of relationship. And the third is what he calls mental vacancy. So let's look at the first. The first is observation of the thoughts, and what he talks about initially is looking at the thoughts from the perspective of their formed nature. So observing for a period of 5 minutes all of the thoughts that rush through the mind. Okay, and this is will be perceived and recognized in their formed nature. This is very important because this is often where people doing work from this type of background will run into a bit of a wall, and that is we're looking at formed thoughts. So from more of a Buddhistic perspective, you have the observation of the thoughts, but the observation of the arising of the thoughts and the cessation of the thoughts. And this takes us a little closer into the depth of potential for meditation. So if we're looking at just the form of the thoughts, then we're sort of stuck at a certain bandwidth. But as we start to allow for everything that is part of that thought, the beginning of the thought, where does it come from? If we can ask ourselves that question, where does the thought come from? Then we find that there might be a whole vast rabbit hole of other thoughts that were connected, that led to this specific thought. And then as we go further and further back, we start to find, prior to there being a string or a stream of thoughts that were in form, there was a type of static or a type of astral energy. So observing the arising of the thoughts starts pulling us deeper into more refined substance of the astral fluid. And then this keeps going. Where's the source of the thought? And it gets more refined into the sort of more abstract mental substance itself. And it keeps refining. Where's the source of this thought? And it ends up taking you into the Akasha right off this very first exercise, if you allow it room to grow. Now, he'll suggest that you write down all of the thoughts that do arise during that time. And this is very valuable from a get to know yourself type of perspective. What are your habits of thinking? Okay, if you just let it go, what are the habits? How long does it take before those habits start to subside? And through just this very first observing the thoughts, if we allow for the observation of the whole wave of the thought, the whole spectrum from the very arising of the thought right through to the cessation and beyond those 2 points, then we get a very, very spiritually holistic potential for a lot of growth based off this one exercise. If we get stuck on the form of the thoughts, then we limit ourselves. Okay, it's the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, but even incredibly smaller than that, right? So we really have to go deeper into that first exercise, and you'll find some pretty phenomenal things come out of it. Now, the next portion of the mental training in step 1 is based off of being choiceful about your thoughts. Okay, so he'll use examples like whatever you're doing, you do that entirely. If you're at work, if you're working, 100% of your focus is on that activity. It's not wandering to your family. It's not wandering to anything else, any entertainment you might be engaged with, in the days or whatever. There's none of that. It's bang, all your focus is on this thing, whatever it is that you're doing. So whatever you do with 100% focus and no wavering of mind. And this can be tricky because we have many habits of wandering focus, and it can take a lot of what we might look at as mental strength or fortitude to not allow the whims of our current situations in other aspects of life to pull the attention out of the chosen activity. Now, this might be a specific object of meditation, right? A mandala or a mudra or mantra, the breath, vital energy, light, akasha, whatever. It could be any specific object of meditation that we're honing our focus into. And anytime the mind wanders to anything else, bang, we bring it back again and again and again and again. And through this process over time, we'll actually find that we cultivate a very similar relationship as we did in the first portion, the observation of the thoughts, to where thoughts come from. Because we want to start catching the wandering of the thoughts from a deeper and deeper and deeper point, a point that's more close to the origination of that perturbation of mind, right? That little bit of static and vibration. So this will actually lead us into a very similar place as observing the thoughts. Now, when we're exploring clarity and this discipline, he also looks at thought streams. And you'll find that as you do this, the scattered wanderings of the mind actually start to dissolve, and you will be able to follow very concise, clear streams of thought where because there's no wandering, the energy can really build, and you can flow through these streams of thought with a lot of insight, right? So there is a lot of insight to be had, and this leads to the usefulness of it in terms of your work or more daily type of activities. Now, when we want to apply this more to meditative activities, then those thought streams start to become something that we can look at as breaks away from the original point of concentration. Okay, now if we do allow for a thought stream, then we also need to be aware of the point of concentration or a greater concentration within which the thought stream occurs. And this starts to work us into a breaking apart of the perceptions in a way that allows for a higher function of meditation of mind. Now, this more or less becomes a combination of observing the thoughts, or in this case, observing the thought streams, and the concentration becomes a mixture of the observer as well as the stream. So right from the get-go, we have multiple points of focus that are required. So lots of exploration to be done. And any exercise or activity that you're going to do from the training standpoint is going to involve both of these, right, to varying degrees. Whatever it is that you're working on, underneath it is a necessity for concentration and a openness of mind, an openness, we could say, a perspective that allows for flow and change without hindering that natural arising and cessation of energy as it bubbles into and out of form. So both of these work hand in hand. The third of the three exercises in the mental training in this step one is what he refers to as vacancy of mind, mental vacancy. And this is essentially done through not having any thoughts arise, also not holding the concentration. So there's no thoughts that arise, no thoughts that are bubbling up or falling away, and there's no concentration being held to sustain that point of focus and essentially cause a reference point against which we release any arising of distraction or other thought. Now, the mental vacancy is a very interesting one, and it essentially can start to arise as a byproduct of the first two. Okay? As you start working this expanding perspective, you start to work into very naturally a mental vacancy type of approach. Now, it can be real weird trying to have no thoughts, right? So the first two steps are the place to start. The first two exercises in the step one mental training are the places to begin, right? Observing the thoughts will naturally allow them to start to fizzle out. And underneath that, you'll find what he looks at as a vacancy of mind. And through concentration, as it becomes the gravitational pull of the task becomes easier and easier and easier, the distractions start to subside, and you find the essence of the mental vacancy within that as well. I've found that these two approaches are far more user-friendly when we're beginning than trying to do non-thinking, right? Now, the closest thing that we might find to this is that place between sleep and awake, right? So when you wake up in the morning, there's a period of time before you pick up your identity. And anyone who's been in a lot of physiological pain or emotional pain, psychological pain, you'll probably be familiar with this, where you start to come into conscious wakefulness just a little bit when you wake up. There's no pain, there's no emotional turbulence, everything's just totally fine, it's great. And then you remember, oh yeah, I'm in pain. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be, unhappy or agitated or this or that or whatever the emotion might be. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be, have this perception of mind and blah, blah, blah. But before that, before we pick up the identity, there is this vacancy. And so if you can tap into that, that's a good indicator, right? That's a very nice indicator and sort of finger pointing the way at what the feeling quality you might be looking for. So observing the thoughts, concentration, right, on single points of focus or thought streams, and vacancy, mental vacancy. These are the three mental training exercises. Now, something that I've only encountered one other tradition that does this, that Bardon does, is he allows for, in the beginning, the absence of the need for an asana or a meditation posture in terms of being upright and very clear straight spine and perfect posture. The other tradition that I explored back in the day, they had what they called meditation position 101, which was literally lying down on your back. And Bardon offers the same potential. Find a comfortable position, lie down, be comfortable, and explore these three different mental training exercises for up to 5 minutes at a time in the beginning, and then you can add a minute to every day or every week or however you want to explore that. He offers some specifics on time frame, but you want to look at your own skill and growth and development and joy in the practice. So by being comfortable, this allows us to look at the quality of the actual mental work that's being done. Instead of the focus being on the pain or discomfort of the body in the beginning, we can jump right to the qualities of mind that we're looking for. Now, the risk you run into here is falling asleep. So don't do that. This can be very tricky if you're lying down, and as the mind states start to slow down, the brainwave states, as you move from beta through alpha, through theta, delta, you get closer and closer into the states commonly associated with sleep. When we touch these states, it's very easy to fall asleep. So if we're lying down, it makes it very, very, very easy to fall asleep. So anything you can do to sustain alertness if you're lying down, maybe you put your hands in a position if you're lying on your back or if you're reclining, that if you fall asleep, they'll fall, something that will let you know so that you can keep your focus on the mental activity you're working on or non-activity and really keep progressing, right, without falling asleep. If you train meditation and you fall asleep every time, you will teach yourself that every time you go to do this thing, you fall asleep. And it's a very difficult habit to unwind. So be very careful with that if you're going to do this in a reclined position. Okay? If you find that you're falling asleep, do it seated upright is always my suggestion. However you happen to be, if you're in like a Burmese meditation posture or a half lotus or you're sitting in a chair, whatever it is, suspend the spine of your own accord so you're not resting on anything, and this will make it very difficult to fall asleep, because if you do, you'll start to conk out, right? You get the head chicken necking thing as you start to fall asleep and wake up. Okay? So that is the mental training offered in step 1, plus some things to be aware of. Like with all of this work, we don't want to get too hung up on exactly the perfect thing that we're supposed to be doing. This is all an exploration. Treat it as such, and be kind with yourself. This is really important, so you can actually keep exploring this. Also, don't be lazy, on the other side of it. Make sure you're diligent with your efforts and sincere with your efforts and your diligence in the exploration and the fun in the practice. Okay, so that is step 1, mental training. Once again, those 3 exercises are observing the thoughts, concentration or one-pointed focus on specific one-pointed thoughts or one points of focus and thought streams, and the last one was the mental vacancy. Okay, so this leads us into the astral section of this book, or an introduction, we could say, into the black and white mirror of the soul, right? So again, when we look at the black and white mirror of the soul, we have a few things to keep in mind. And here we are. So this is looking at introspection and what he calls self-cognizance. Okay, but the introspective process is really, really important with all of this internal work. Okay, what we need to become aware of is all of us, right? All of our mental habits, all of our emotional habits, all of our physical habits, so that we can begin to upgrade this by finding resonance through all the layers with higher and higher frequencies and qualities of being. And it's very difficult to do this when we are hiding our own atrocious nature from ourselves. So, one thing you can do is have a notebook, and throughout the day, as often as you can, you take out your notebook and, okay, what's happening right now? Can you see any faults in your mental, emotional, and physical activities? right? Can you look at where you've gone wrong, where you could have acted better, where for some unknown reason, cough, cough, ego and perceptions of self is ultimately the reason for, a lot of that stuff. And what stimulates that is very far-reaching. The forces are very far-reaching. It's not just, only our own stuff. There's a lot that goes on there. But we have to look at that. And we want to start looking at what stimulates our worst. And that's from the external. Then we look from the internal. What stimulates our worst? Our worst expressions and habits of mind, our worst expressions and habits of emotion, our worst expressions and habits of physical action. So from the outside, it's a lot easier to look at because it's all because of something else. But it's that something else that stimulates something on the inside, stimulates some type of perception and perspective of self, essentially, and that puts us in contrast with what's happening externally. That's what the self will do. It's a barrier there. So we need to look at that. We got to take a look at that, and we got to work on these things. Now, many people, myself included, when I first started doing, a very disciplined meditative practice, within the first, couple of weeks, sitting there, and this is an experience not common, not, only of my own. It's common to most people who get into this stuff, where you're sitting there and you go, oh my God, like I am an asshole. Wow. Like you just had no idea. Then you start looking at the actions that you took and where those came from. And you start to recognize the entitlement that was involved at more and more subtle layers. So this introspective process is very, very important. Now, I will throw in a couple of things that I sort of disagree with in the way that this is written, based off, having engaged with the practices in the way it was written. So it's written in this book that you want to be as ruthless and pitiless with yourself as possible. And there is merit to this when we have a habit of making excuses for ourselves that we've been building and fostering our entire life. There is merit to being ruthless with yourself, pitiless, cutting like a knife. There's value to it, for sure. However, often the attitude that accompanies that is very condensory, it's very contractive, and it actually inhibits the liberation of these poor habits because we end up looking at the observer and the habit, and then we have often some type of emotional reaction to the habit that we're observing, and we start to become at war with ourselves, and this creates quite a tension, lots of, the disciplined approach. The throat gets tight, chest gets tight as we are in conflict with ourselves. So I find this ruthlessness can be actually deleterious to growth over the long run. So if you are someone, however, who has absolutely no discipline and you need to work on that, then for a period of time there might be value to it. We want to be aware that we're not causing damage to ourselves, though. Some people get into meditation because they've had quite traumatic backgrounds growing up, typically, and we're looking often from that stage, from that perspective, for a type of freedom from the pain of experience, right? From the internal pain that we might be carrying around with us all the time. Now, depending on the type of trauma someone might be working with, in the beginning, it might not be super useful to be ruthless with yourself, to be hard on yourself. You might need to start with having a lot more compassion and openness so that you can take the pain and allow it to start dissolving. Anything we pressurize, it digs in, right? So if somebody else starts pointing at us and going, hey, you know what your problem is? We usually go, It's you not fucking off right now. That's my problem. And we dig in. It strengthens the protection against the intrusion or against the pressurization. Which means when we do that with ourselves, it can actually strengthen the bonding mechanism that's holding those particular traumatic memories and physiological inhibitions and dysfunctions and tensions and all the other stuff that's holding it there. It can actually strengthen the identity of the trauma itself. So really be careful with how you approach this, with how you interpret pitiless and ruthlessness with yourself. And I found it to be of most value to have a type of sincerity and compassion, and open-mindedness, and over time the ego, the identity that's encased within the trauma, the entitlement, all that stuff, it can start to dissolve. Okay, so introspection is very, very important. Now, anything that we want to develop awareness of the mind, one of the ways to teach ourselves to pay attention to something is to journal it. I first encountered this in relation to this was back in when I was exploring some of the tracker skills, and they looked at it, the example I gave was in terms of weather, right? If you want to know what the weather is outside at any given time, without having gone outside or having windows, 5 times a day, 6 times a day, once an hour, once every 30 minutes, check outside. What's happening? Is there, walk outside. Is there wind, right? Is it raining? What kind of clouds are there? Where's the sun in the sky? What's the angle? Blah, etc., etc., etc. And you will develop a background subconscious relationship to what the weather is outside. Okay, now if we want to develop introspection and the abilities to see deep into the essence of who and what we are, then we'll start writing that, right? And this is what I mentioned, having a notepad with you so that any time throughout the day that you observe yourself acting in a certain way or thinking or feeling in a certain way and you wonder like, man, why did I do that? Like that's weird. Did I want to do that? Did I want to get angry there? Did I want to treat that person poorly? Did I want to glare at that person? Did I want to, etc., etc., etc.? The more we are aware of this, the more we can cultivate and evolve the individual that is partaking in this path. So in order to be aware more often, start writing down what you're perceiving of yourself. Okay? Now, this is once again an exploration of mental training, right? It's an exploration of observing the thoughts. This includes observation of the feelings and observation of the actions, the physiological relationships and explorations, the energy dips and expansions that come through perspective of the world around us and of ourselves. So there's a lot to be learned from this. Now, the next part of this step in the book, of this training of the soul, is the introduction to the black and white mirror, which is essentially you look at your typical habits of mind, the typical emotions that start to arise. And every time you notice an emotion arising, write it down in that little book that you might have, and then you see if you can allocate it to an element. Now, Bardon's approach is usually mind first, right? So he's looking at the elements from an intellectual understanding of what emotion is. And while there's value in this, I have found personally that I like to work it from the other end, which is I like to work with the energy beneath the emotion, with the elements and how they arise and play beneath the emotions, and how those oceans of energy give rise to the perspective shapes and perceptual shapes of emotion specific emotion, etc., and work from underneath. That's my preference. So that is when I'm teaching, that is where I work with people from that end of things. However, from an emotional literacy perspective, this is incredibly valuable. So start with all the negatives and then allocate them into fire, water, air, earth. This is Bardon's suggestion here. And then do it with all the positive emotions that you have on a daily basis as well. And of course, writing these both down. And you will get the negatives, the black, the positives, the white. And this gives you a way to begin working this. Now, if you do, say, one-pointed focus mental training, a lot of this black and white mirror work does itself. If you really are truly diligent with the mental training, a lot of the black and white mirror work does itself. Because anytime you're not focusing, right, purely, I did a lot of Anapana meditation back in the day, which has its point of reference here, which is why I point to here when I talk about concentration and focus. If you're doing a lot of focus training, anytime you're not focused on your object of meditation, the mind will be wandering, the emotions will be wandering. You'll start observing more and more subtle activity of the mind, subtle activity of emotion, of body, and within this activity will be all kinds of information and all kinds of observation of the demon that is this thing that we are working on transforming and alchemizing over the course of this work. So that said, you can, of course, work on this approach of, writing down the emotions and then ascribing an element to them. And he gives some examples here. Okay, you can also look at neutral type of emotions and where those might fall. There's always positive emotions, or of each element, there's positive and negative within each element. Positive fire, positive water, negative water, earth, air, etc. Okay, so you can start to break that apart. And this sort of starts to teach the subconscious the dual nature of everything that is of form, and how there's always two sides of everything. Okay, so there's a lot of value deeper behind the exercises. Okay, now the suggestions here are the habits that are the most common and disruptive to your life, or proactive in a positive way, that are middle common and that are least common, and then you can work on them appropriately. Personally, I found that the hyper-intellectualized approach doesn't really work for me. I find it's a very easy way to distract ourselves from actually doing the work on the meditative front. But for some people, there can be a lot of value in exploring it from the top-down type of approach in terms of using the intellect first. So there is value there, okay? Now, as we move on, that's magical schooling of the soul. We looked at that, we looked at this. This brings us into the schooling of the physical body, material carnal body. Okay, and this is really, really important. Let's see, what's the first thing here? Okay, so this is really important. Now, when you wake up, all right, this is something we want to tune into. The moment that we wake up. And this isn't necessarily in the book, but may as well hear it because it's quite valuable. I mentioned already in this video that we can become aware of that space between sleep and awake. Okay? And then once we choose full wakefulness, out of bed, bang, immediate. Or if you have a schedule that necessitates the use of alarms, when the alarm goes off, you are out of bed. You never hit a snooze button, ever. The alarm goes off, you get up. We are building habits of the nervous system. If you teach yourself that what you said you would do, which was wake up when the alarm went off, you don't do, then you are essentially teaching yourself that it's okay to lie to yourself. right? And this will start to permeate into other aspects of life. So we want to make sure that we teach ourselves that what we say we will do, we do, especially in the beginning of a path like this. All of this has room for change as things go on, but when we get started with a training process, or when we start to begin exploring the spiritual path, it's good to set some boundaries that force the dissolution of some of our old habits so that we can really kick things off. So your alarm goes off, bang, you wake up, and sometimes you have like weights right next to your bed. You wake up, boom, you start swinging a kettlebell. Or you wake up, bang, you walk into a cold shower. Something to really wake you up, tune the fascia. The cold tunes the fascia. Weights will tune the fascia, wake the body up, force connection, okay? And then you're off. Now, the suggestion in this book is a preparation for pore breathing, which is scrubbing of the skin with ideally a boar's hair brush. And this is something I actually just started exploring a few months ago, and I really, really like it. It's very, very nice. There's a lot of lymph movement that occurs. You're, of course, getting the dead cells off and opening up the skin. But there's other fluids that are moving. There's wakefulness that's occurring. There's the mind waking up into more and more refined portions of the skin. And he suggests that you do this until you're a little raw, just a little pink, and then a cold shower. At the time this was written, I think people had more buckets of water they would use, so washing your face, upper body, but cold water to, again, wake you up and set the tone for what's going on. Now, for the pore scrubbing, the skin scrubbing, there's other frequencies I like to run while I'm doing this that I like to pore breathe and release into as I'm doing the skin work, frequencies that are associated with healthy skin. And with nourishment and rejuvenation and revitalization, all this kind of stuff. So, you'll figure out what works for you. So you can turn the scrubbing process into something that you're meditating on as you go through it. Okay, then of course you have the cold, and however you choose to organize this in terms of when you might exercise a little bit. He suggests stretching the body so you retain the limber nature of your physicality as time goes on. There's so much more that we can do besides stretching. So any type of mobility work under different types of load is really valuable, so you get strong and flexible. Anything that has to do with bouncing and waking the fascia up and teaching the mind and proprioceptive system where it is, right? Bouncing seems to be quite useful for that, in terms of jumping around, taking a weight and jumping around, going for a quick run or a sprint, hit the ground really fast and go. Any, different ways of waking up the body, waking up the mind, etc. So that is the first portion of this physical aspect of this training. Okay, the next looks at breathing. Okay, and when we are looking at breathing, typically in most systems what we have is we work on active breathing. And Bardon very purposefully suggests something much different, which is natural breathing and using, once again, the intellect to perceive the air around the body and to look at the air as something that is, again, of the elements, a refined relationship to the elements. And in terms of like a relationship of like food, which would be coarser, the air would be a little more refined. It is something that is nourishing us. So what are we going to nourish ourselves with? And this is the very beginning of impregnating, is the word he uses, or empowering energy with intention. And so as you breathe the air, and in this particular training, it's done in a relaxed, natural way, you have a very clear intention of bringing in harmony, of bringing in tranquility, of bringing in health, and he uses success in there. It's nice to do things that don't have a tie to necessarily specific egoistic expressions. So, something to explore: tranquility, calm, contentedness, energized, vitalized, vibrant, lively, engaged, right? There's some, things that you can explore with those words as well. And again, instead of making this a real physical pressurization of the lungs and working the musculature, what he suggests is that you work the mental intention behind the breathing. And this is where he starts you with this. And there's a lot of value in this. Some of the suggestions on number of breaths, etc., I found personally to be fairly pointless. But it depends, I think, on your concentration. Once again, the more refined and pure your concentration is, the more energy will build up. One of the downsides of this particular system is that it's using the intellect's relationship first, and it can be very easy to delude ourselves. And this is where I find the inclusion of Qi Gong to be incredibly valuable right from the get-go, because it gives you a very clear, tangible relationship to that energy, right? And from there, then we can start more easily perceiving the change in the energy based off the different intentions when we're breathing in and out. Okay, so if you want to follow the book purely, of course you can follow the instructions of a specific number of breaths. I found that a lot of that stuff can be useful if you're crazy busy, but if you actually have set aside some good time to train, you might want to explore being setting a timer, say, instead of specific numbers of breath, or just once you get accustomed to it, go for a walk and just focus on that. Of course, like in any meditations, you have lying meditation, then seated, then standing, then walking. The more complex the activity is, the less of our attention in the beginning can be devoted to the meditative process we're trying to work. So the simpler the environment and the activity of the body, the more attention is available to really work the intricacies of the meditation that we're working on. The more complex the activity of the body, or the social situation or the environment, the less bandwidth is available for the pure focus on the object of meditation. Of course, as you become more and more familiar with the object of meditation, complex scenarios don't inhibit the relationship to the object of the practice nearly as much. Okay, and that's even a metric you can use as one of progress in terms of your relationship with the exercise or the energy. Okay, so that is the beginnings of the breathing that we look at here in this step one. Okay, and again, a nourishment. That was a key word there, is the air is nourishing us. And there is energy in the air. This is using just the air. It's nourishing us. What is it nourishing us with? Not just the oxygen, etc., but the intentions that we put into that air. Why is it valuable to put it into the air? Because then we actually get to breathe it in, and we can, as an exercise in meditation, watch all of that, the intention as it permeates through the lungs, through into the blood, through into the tissues, and the musculature, the bones, etc., etc., and it can lead us into a deep understanding and cultivation of awareness of the body, vital forces within us. Okay, So lots of value there. Again, nourishment, super important to look at it as nourishment. Now, many systems look at active breathing, whether it's active inhalation, passive exhale, active exhale, passive inhale. Both are active. Different movements with the breath, etc., etc. Holding the breath, holding the inhalation, holding after the exhalation, all kinds of variations. And they can be really great for pumping up a lot of energy, absolutely. There can also be ramifications on the health front. So you want to work on that kind of stuff with people who've done a lot of that kind of work, and maybe have systems that have already gone through the trial and error process, hundreds of years ago, so that you don't have to take the brunt of that, those mistakes if you're making mistakes. However, there is a lot of energy that can be cultivated and harnessed and liberated from active breathing work. So if that's an interest of yours, absolutely, there's a lot to explore there. Okay, just be safe with it, be careful with it. What's nice with this system is that it begins from a place of natural, calm breathing. Okay, and it looks at the quality of what's behind the breath, behind the workings of the mind, and the relation itself of the mind to the breath of life itself. And then from there proceeds. Okay, so stuff to explore there. All right, now the next part of this step 1 physical is looking at intake of nourishment in relation to food. Okay, food is it's pretty useful. You need to eat it to keep living. So you want to be aware of the food that you intake, and you want to do the same thing with the air that we did with the air to the food. Okay, now because food is dense, this can have a very strong relationship when we are essentially charging it up with the intention of whatever it is we're working with. It will affect the physical quite strongly. Okay, now that's because it's a denser substrate. So you can really begin to explore some depth of personal growth and practice through taking the time to charge up your food. Hello there. Come here. Just got a noisy dog. So you can take some time here. Now, he suggests here that you never read. This was, again, the common media consumption back in when this was written, that you don't read when you eat. That the purpose of eating is not to distract ourselves or even to eat. The purpose is to sustain your connection with these intentions and to imbibe that intention through the food, the substrate of the food, into the body. Now, we have far more distractions. So not watching movies, not watching TV, not reading, and even social interaction, all of these things that might distract us from having the majority of our focus on this energy, right? And there is lots of value here because many of us, we use eating as our break, right? We use nourishing ourselves, drinking water, etc., as a little break, a coffee break, a this, that, the other thing. It's a break from the focus of the mind. So it can take a little time to wake up that focus. And when we are choosing to work through these periods of habitual distraction, there can be a lot of static that arises. And that's there's nothing wrong with that. Hey, come here. Right, there's nothing wrong with that. Hey, come here. All right, what are you doing? Now, the last portion of this particular step is in relation to what he calls the magic of water. Okay, so in terms of its ability to accumulate, right? So your ability to charge it. And it's interesting. He says the colder the water is, the greater its capacity for accumulation. right? And he says it reaches its greatest receptivity at 4 degrees Celsius, which is 39 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very interesting because the people who've done a lot of research in the last, however many decades on water and structured water, the healthiest types of water, and really explored water and the rejuvenative qualities, the intricacies of water, 4 degrees. So interesting. He has that in here. 4 degrees Celsius as the ideal temperature. Okay, now magic of water. Okay, he's looking as like from sort of a physics perspective of rapidity of movement when things get hotter and maybe become less able to hold charge because the vibration's faster. So if that's something you want to explore, you can. The loading up or empowering of the substance, again, that 4 degrees seems to be the ideal. Okay, so this can be done with any type of drink that you consume. And you can, all right, I'm gonna have to deal with this dog here, so we'll continue this in a moment. The last couple of things to look at here in relation to the power of water and water magic as an introduction to it is using the natural magnetic properties or cohesive properties of water to suck out negative attributes. So all of the negative things we might have noticed in the introspective work, we can cleanse from ourselves. And so once again, we apply mindfulness, right? Every time, for example, as mentioned here, you wash your hands, you can offer a prayer to the water to cleanse negative attributes, to suck negative attributes away. Every time you take a shower, you can be cleansing, allowing the water to cleanse and suck negative attributes out of the water. You can work on this, of course, when you're drinking as well. If you're drinking like purified water, that's a really easy one because it will naturally pull all kinds of stuff out anyway because it's purified. So you can look into that. There's plenty of examples of people demineralizing their bodies from drinking purified water. So if you are drinking purified water, you also want to make sure it's mineralized. Okay. Now, this is using the magnetic quality of the water, the purifying, healing qualities within water. On the other side of this cleansing is allowing for the cohesive properties of the water to be used from a charging standpoint. So what would you like to gain from the water? And so he uses examples of improved eyesight and, submerging the head and rolling the eyes around, doing eye exercises essentially in water that's been magnetized with the wish or intention of good, clear sight. There's another suggestion for the elasticity and buoyancy and lush nature of the skin, that you can go through these processes, and that if you are doing a charging process, he suggests you go through that ritual 7 times as that particular day's relationship to that ritual, if you are charging things up. Okay, so lots can be done with water. There's a lot of power in water, and when we're exploring the waters, there is no better place to explore than actual water. Go to a live, just lush running river, forests around, and you'll start to feel the magnetic quality of the waters. You'll start to feel that fullness, that rejuvenative quality, revitalizing quality that the waters have. So the magic of water is looked at initially here from the perspective of cleansing and a little bit of charging. Now, Bardon uses the terms of basically impregnating the substance with a wish and or an intention. Now, one of the things we run into here is that very often this wish, this intention, is purely self-serving. There is always more potency and power available when the wish or the need, the intention, the desired outcome is for the good of everything beyond the self, right? Something outside of the self. The need is beyond the self. And this increases the potential for numerous reasons. One of the biggest is that it provides a through path for growth and change and liberative outcome. So something to contemplate, okay? So these are the exercises of the first step of the training for Franz Bardon, Initiation into Hermetics, his text here. We have mental training, and we have observing the thoughts, we have concentration specifically, and concentration of thought streams, awareness and focus on specific thought streams, choicefulness in what we focus on, and vacancy. We have our astral exploration of the beginning understandings, the black and white mirror from an intellectual standpoint, okay, and the introspective work that comes from that, as well as your initial exploration of tinkering around with the elements a little bit as perspectives of viewing emotions. Okay, and then of course we have the physical body, the scrubbing of the skin, and the cold water, the whole morning routine to create a tone of what we might look at as like mastery over urge and impulse throughout the day, so that the higher functions of the spirit have the platform to work through less impeded. Okay, we have the breathing, adding intention into the breath and following its metabolic respirative type of processes through, and the same with nourishment of the food, treating eating and consumption of food substances in a sacred way, which, I mean, if that's when you're used to taking your break, having your distraction, your moment of like, okay, I'll just chill out, do my thing, that can be real hard. And of course, the cleansing and charging potentials of water, the beginnings of water magic. So I hope you enjoyed this and it was helpful for you. If you're interested in training with me, you can take a look at the programs on the website, which is in the description. Also, I have a workshop coming up, June 2025. Again, you can check the description. That is a 16-day level 1 and 2 spiritual attunement initiation. We go through a lot of really transformative stuff during that, so you're welcome to take a look at that. All right, thank you for your time, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye.